You're listening to How to Drink Less, and I'm your host, Adriana Cloud. Whether your goal is to cut back, take a break, or say goodbye to alcohol for good, this podcast will help you stop drinking on autopilot, learn how to manage cravings, and feel fully in control around alcohol. It's easier than you think. Listen on to find out how. Hey friends, welcome back for another episode. Today I want to talk about how we evaluate our relationship with alcohol. We often ask ourselves questions like, am I drinking too much? Do I have a drinking problem? Or even, am I an alcoholic? But a better question, and a much more useful one, might be, what kind of a relationship do I want to have with alcohol? And this shift can change everything. But of course, before you get to where you want to go, you have to know where you're starting from. In other words, what's your current relationship with alcohol like? And how would you know if it's healthy or normal? What are the criteria? As you may have guessed already, these questions don't have an obvious, easy answer, but that doesn't mean that they're not worth asking. This isn't about diagnosing yourself or labeling your behavior. It's about being honest with yourself about what role alcohol plays in your life. We normally think of habits like drinking alcohol or drinking coffee or eating sugar in terms of how much we consume, or maybe the frequency of consumption or the time of day. We come up with rules around that. Maybe you tell yourself that you won't drink during the week, or you only have one drink and then switch to water. And it makes sense. That's the most obvious way to think about drinking. How many drinks we have per sitting or over the course of a week. It's the easiest way to compare ourselves to other people too. If we're out with friends, we check to see how much they're drinking, and we usually try to match them consciously or unconsciously. If someone else is ordering another glass of wine, then we feel safe to order a second glass as well. If we see someone else drinking more than us, we probably feel better because we're not drinking as much as them. Our drinking seems more reasonable in comparison. I, for sure, did a lot of comparison when I was still drinking. Not necessarily counting my drinks, but keeping an eye on other people. Especially the last couple of years of my drinking career, I was hyper aware of everyone else's drinking. How many drinks they had had, how slowly they were drinking, whether they poured more in their glass than they poured in mine, exactly how much was left in the bottle. I knew all of that. I was always paying attention. Quantity is also the main focus when it comes to how government institutions frame alcohol consumption. The relevant health authority in each country sets maximum recommended weekly limits to minimize health risks. The guidelines vary from country to country, and in some countries, there is a higher recommended limit for men than for women. But honestly, most people don't know what the guidelines are, and even fewer people follow them. I certainly did not. Even if I'd known what the maximum recommended limit was, I would not have cared. I already knew I was over the line, and I didn't want to look too closely. Of course, it's important to know how much you drink. Being honest with yourself about the quantities you're consuming is crucial. But focusing only on how much you're drinking could be one of the reasons you're stuck in a cycle where you're trying to cut back, but you're not managing. Let me explain what I mean. First of all, there will always be people who are drinking more than you. So if you're telling yourself, well, at least I'm not that bad, or at least I drink less than Michelle does, or at least I didn't start at 10 a.m. like my uncle does, that doesn't actually mean that your own relationship with alcohol is not problematic. And even if everyone else around you is drinking about the same as you, again, that doesn't mean it's healthy or without negative consequences. And the effects of alcohol vary from person to person as well, depending on genes, gender, lifestyle, weight, overall health, pre-existing conditions, and many other factors. Second of all, You can't evaluate a relationship just based on quantity. Imagine doing that for your friendships, deciding that you have a solid friendship with someone just based on how much time you spend together. No, that's ridiculous. You would also think about whether you have interests in common with that person, how they make you feel, whether they're supportive, and so on. And so it is with alcohol too. In addition to how much you're drinking, you also need to think about, first of all, why you drink, and second of all, the impact alcohol has on your life. I talked in the last episode about the reasons we as humans drink in general, but I really want you to think about why you personally find yourself reaching for alcohol. Is it your go-to way to relax? Is it a reward at the end of a stressful day? Does it help you to feel less anxious around other people so you can loosen up and engage in the conversation? There are no wrong answers here, and you probably find that you turn to alcohol to solve different problems at different times. And I say solve in quotation marks because, of course, alcohol isn't actually solving anything, but it might mask the symptoms of a problem, or it might help you to temporarily numb the unpleasant emotions associated with the problem. And whatever your reasons for drinking, ask yourself if you like those reasons. For example, if alcohol is your only coping mechanism for dealing with stress, do you like that you are reliant on alcohol to get you through the day? Or would you prefer to be able to manage your emotions without drinking? Or if you find yourself pouring a drink when you're bored and not sure what to do with yourself, is that something that you want to continue doing? Maybe yes, or maybe not. And I want to stress that I have zero judgment here towards anyone. I used to drink for all kinds of reasons. I barely needed a reason at all, to be honest. In fact, I was very good at inventing reasons why a drink was necessary. And by reasons, I really mean excuses. I've been that person who thought that alcohol was a welcome addition to any occasion and a requirement for most social interactions. And I've made a lot of poor choices and done a lot of embarrassing, if not downright harmful and hurtful things while I was drinking. So I really have no leg to stand on to judge anyone. But I do recommend that you start being more honest with yourself about why you drink. One way I frame this question to my clients is to think about need versus want. We don't need alcohol to survive. That much we can agree on. Alcohol is nowhere on the list of things required for survival of the species. Alcohol is always a want rather than a need. So ask yourself, are there situations in your life where you feel like you need alcohol? That you wouldn't be okay if you weren't drinking? Or that you couldn't tolerate the circumstances or the people you're with? Or that you simply wouldn't enjoy yourself if there's no alcohol? Or maybe that you would be in too much pain, emotional or physical, or too anxious or too bored without it. I love cheese, and I often want cheese, but I don't ever feel like I won't be okay unless I can have cheese. I know that if I'm meeting friends for dinner, it won't ruin my fun if we don't order cheese. I don't get anxious at the thought of running out of cheese or spending a night without cheese. In other words, cheese is not something I feel that I need. It's merely something I want. Because I'm not dependent on cheese the same way that I was dependent on alcohol. So start to notice whether you think of alcohol as something you need. And if the answer is yes, see how you feel about that. And then let's talk about the impact of alcohol. Because again, how much you drink only tells one part of the story. Another big part is how alcohol affects you, your health, your confidence, your relationships, and so on. Be really honest with yourself. What are you noticing about the consequences of your drinking? Too many people get hung up on the question, am I an alcoholic? Maybe you've even Googled that or some variation of that question. I definitely have, and more than once too. I had known for a while that I was drinking a lot, even though I wasn't ready to do anything about it. But every now and then, I would have those nights when my own mask of denial would crack, and I could no longer pretend that my overdrinking was just a temporary indulgence. And on those nights, I would ask Google to diagnose me. The answers I found were both comforting and disturbing. Comforting because there's no agreed upon definition of what an alcoholic is, and no established threshold for what level of consumption or what symptoms qualify one as an alcoholic. So Google could not point a finger at me and slap the label alcoholic across my forehead. There's no medical test doctors can run on you either, in case you're wondering. Alcoholic is a subjective term and a fluid construct, not a precise and measurable one. And the search results I found were also disturbing because, well, some of those questions that are supposed to help you figure out if you should be worried about your drinking definitely described my habits more accurately than I would have liked. For example, there is a self-assessment by the National Council on Alcohol and Drug Dependence in the US, which you can take online. I will put the link in the show notes if you're curious, but please note that these kinds of online quizzes are not meant to be diagnostic tools, but they can sometimes bring to the surface things that we've been trying to ignore. So this particular quiz has 26 questions, which you can answer yes or no. And depending on how many yeses you get, you're told whether or not you might have an alcohol use disorder. By the time I came across that assessment, I already knew what it would tell me. It was already profoundly clear to me that my drinking was unhealthy and probably dangerous. I didn't need a quiz to tell me that. I felt that every morning when I woke up with yet another hangover, ashamed and defeated. And honestly, the mere fact that I was searching for answers on Google was already a sign that I had a problem. My advice is, don't get hung up on labels and numbers. It doesn't matter whether or not we can definitively say who is an alcoholic and who isn't. It doesn't matter if you drink only 5 nights a week while your best friend drinks every night. It doesn't matter if you don't drink in the morning, or if you've never driven drunk, or if you've never shown up to work drunk. These are just lines in the sand. Maybe you've crossed some of them, or a lot of them, or none of them. But that's not what matters. The only thing that really matters is, how do you feel about your drinking? Are you happy with how much you're drinking, and why you drink, and how you feel after drinking? If the answer to these questions is yes, that's fantastic. Carry on. But if the answer is no, if you're intimately familiar with that shame of not being able to say no to alcohol, the shame of breaking your promises to other people or to yourself, that low hum of dread when you think about taking a break from drinking, if that's you, you don't need Google to tell you that something needs to change. You don't need a label or a diagnosis to start making changes. You just need to tell yourself the truth, that how you're drinking is not how you want to be drinking, and that you want a different relationship with alcohol. I know it might be scary, but the sooner you can start being honest with yourself, the better. All right, my friends, that's where I'll leave you for today. Thank you for listening. If you're looking for practical advice for how to say no to alcohol and say yes to yourself, you will want to get on my email list. Sign up to receive my free guide with 7 steps to kickstart your sobriety. The link is in the show notes, so go and grab it now, and I'll see you soon in your inbox.